Okay, the next speaker is Roger Silverman, who's the author of the very readable and I think important booklet, Labour's Coming Split. So over to Roger Silverman.
All right, thank you, comrades. Let me start by saying we're not setting up yet another mini party. We're campaigning for the trade unions and working class organisations to found a mass party. When we first proposed the launch of this campaign, some comrades argued, what's the point? With the honourable exception of the Bakers Union, there's no sign that the trade union leaders are moving away from Labour. And what we say is, exactly, that's precisely why we need this campaign. If they were doing it already, we wouldn't need to campaign for it. Yes, it's disappointing that last week's Unite conference rejected a motion calling for disaffiliation. But it's not surprising that Sharon Graham's appeal to the delegates sounded plausible. Now is not the time, a Labour government is coming in, let's hold their feet to the fire, etc. But what will happen after a Starmer victory? What possible argument can be put forward then for staying within this hollowed out former Labour Party? It's true that past Labour leaders have always betrayed their promises, but Starmer hasn't even waited to gain office first. He's already reneged on every single previous promise. No scrapping of student tuition fees, no green investment programme, no restoration of stolen child benefits, let alone his original pledge to stand by Corbyn's radical programme. He's already boasting, in effect, of an openly Tory programme. Now, you may say that too is nothing new. Blair was already a self-proclaimed business politician. He scrapped Clause 4 as an explicit guarantee to the capitalist class that Labour was no longer even a token socialist party. But Blair came to office at a time when he could still carry through some reforms, albeit cheap, cut price and largely token reforms, the minimum wage, devolution, the Good Friday Agreement, public investment in the infrastructure, even though it was under the fraudulent and exorbitant private finance initiative system. But what reforms can Starmer even pretend to offer under a decrepit, crisis-ridden capitalism today? He refuses even to maintain the current miserable living standards, with millions dependent on food banks, children going hungry, families facing a shivering winter. He bans MPs from joining picket lines. Remember that in the 1970s, Labour cabinet ministers stood on the Grunwick's picket line, even including Shirley Williams, who soon afterwards split from Labour to form the Social Democratic Party. So once a Starmer regime is in office, what arguments will trade union leaders offer for refusing to break loose from the Labour straitjacket? The Labour Party has been irretrievably mutilated by a rolling mass purge to appease a ruling class which was panic-stricken by the surge of support for Corbyn. Starmer was planted at its head for one sole purpose, to destroy it. And he's carried through the plan systematically and methodically. Stalin himself would have been lost in admiration. Even under his regime of terror, he felt the need to stage at least token show trials of his victims before executing them. Starmer's justice comes straight from Alice in Wonderland, or better still, from Kafka. Starmer has goaded any remaining left members to walk out. If you don't like the changes we made, he said, the door is open and you can leave. And one of his henchmen, Peter Kyle, actually blurted out his real motives. He said, if you don't agree with support for business, then this party isn't for you. Now, in 1931, when Ramsay MacDonald adopted a cuts programme not very different from that of Starmer today, Labour rank-and-file trade unionists revolted en masse and vomited MacDonald and his collaborators out of the party. And even more to the point, in 1900, when the elementary right to strike came under attack from the politicians to which the trade unions were then affiliated, they severed their links with the Liberal Party and established the Labour Representation Committee, which soon became the Labour Party. And we're in exactly the same position today. The only difference is that Lloyd George and company were far more radical than Keir Starmer today. The Labour Party today is savagely mutilated and it's bleeding to death. After a miserable couple of years, Starmer's government will be unceremoniously dumped, and it'll follow the ex-socialist parties of France, which won 1.7% in the recent presidential elections, Sweden, on its lowest vote for a century, Germany, now overtaken by the racist AfD, Norway, Denmark, Greece, and as we're going to see this weekend, Spain. If ever there was a need for a genuine party of Labour, it's now. There's a real thirst for such a party. And how do we know? From the surge of hundreds of thousands into the Labour Party when Corbyn was leader, from the 4 million new votes gained in the 2017 election, and yes, from the 2019 election too. It was a disappointing result, but the constant repetition that this was Labour's worst result for 80 years is a straight lie. The test of a party's popularity is how many people vote for it. And the fact is that even in 2019, Labour under Corbyn still won far more votes than in 2015 under Miliband, 2010 under Brown, and even 2005 under Blair when Labour won. And in professional surveys, a clear 70% of under 40s call themselves socialists. Now, one key factor in the replacement of the Liberal Party by Labour was the widening of the franchise in 1918. It found its electoral base among the millions of newly enfranchised workers who'd been previously deprived of a vote. But today, too, millions are politically disenfranchised. How else can we explain the return of those voters who flocked back to the Labour banner under Corbyn's leadership in 2017? They weren't former Tory voters. They came from among those 5 million former Labour voters who had abstained in the three previous elections because they saw no difference between the Blairites and the Tories. Their counterparts in Scotland, of course, found temporarily perhaps an alternative home in the SNP. And the colossal surge in Labour's vote in 2017 not only exposes the lie that Corbyn's policies were unpopular, it also refutes the nonsensical idea that Labour can only win by moderating its policies to appeal to the so-called floating voters. Millions of people consciously abstain, and only once they find a party worth voting for do they rally to the cause. So where are these hundreds of thousands of former party activists and these millions of Corbyn voters now? Why is there no mass socialist party today? First, because of the paralysis of the Labour left. They're stuck in a time warp. This is not a gentleman's disagreement between friends. No one nowadays can keep up the myth that Labour is a so-called broad church, with even the pretense of a common objective, but with differences only on details of finer tuning and timing. Countless attempts have been made to set up alternative left parties. Right-wing parties can easily spring up overnight. All they need is a few billionaires and a couple of media conglomerates. That's how Farage did it. But a mass socialist party can't be conjured up by a snap of the fingers. Why have they failed so far? Because no individual, no matter how charismatic, can create one out of thin air. The stage is littered with political corpses of harakiri socialists from the days of Hindman and of James Maxwell onwards. And more recently, Arthur Scargill, leader of Britain's greatest strike since 1926, George Galloway, who'd won a stunning by-election victory, militants which had led the Liverpool Council revolt and the poll tax campaign, Tusk, the SWP, Respect, and so many other now impotent fringe groups. All solidarity with the courageous campaigner Chris Williamson, who fought so hard against his fellow Labour MPs. But I'm sorry, where is he now? He's gone from his own group Resist to Arthur Scargill's Socialist Labour Party and now to George Galloway's Workers' Party. But it's clear that none of these little improvised alternative left parties is leading anywhere. What's needed is not just yet another pop-up party under a self-appointed leader hawking a ready-made programme and advertising itself in search of a rank and file. Now, of course, we welcome the initiatives taken by other comrades to form socialist groupings and forums, and that includes Left Unity, Breakthrough, the Broad Front being assembled now by Ken Loach and others. The Labour Party, of course, was founded on more than just the trade unions. It was an amalgamation of trade unions and socialist societies, the ILP, the Fabians, initially the Social Democratic Federation and others. they all played a role in ploughing the soil and planting the seeds, and so can any contemporary formations. So we are all playing our part, and there's no principal gulf between us. But the decisive force which brought millions into political life was when the trade unions rose to their feet and asserted their right to political representation. It's painfully slow. The trade unions move only clumsily and ponderously. The pre-war cartoonist David Lowe always portrayed the TUC as a lumbering cart horse. But seismic tremors are shaking the ground. And let's remember also that none of the unions currently on the front line of struggle, the teachers, the nurses, the railway workers, are even affiliated to the Labour Party. They should be at the forefront of efforts to gain political representation, not obviously by joining Starmer's party, but by their own political initiative. So the Labour movement will create its own party. It will formulate its own programme. It will appoint its own leaders. And it's our duty as socialists to help speed up this process, to help launch a mass workers' party, and to campaign for a clear socialist programme which will end the nightmare of capitalism and secure the future of civilization. Thank you, comrades.